Cool. Alrighty, well, I hope everyone had a fantastic lunch break. Normally this is the part where I try to like run around and stay as energized as possible because first talk after lunch, like it's nap time, right? But no, we're gonna try and keep this as fun and exciting as possible. But I do have my my coffee here with me to keep me jazzy for you guys. I'm with you for the next 30 minutes. So we are going to get going on environmental protection. So some of this is going to skim over some of what earlier presenters talked about as it relates to LD50s, being sure we're selecting the right product for the right time. If it's not too difficult, there are a few slides in here where I really like hearing feedback from you all, like things that in terms of public perception, feedback that you guys get. It's really good for me to hear, and I normally learn more from you all during these kinds of conversations because you're the ones going into battle, right? You're the ones that are having to make these decisions, engaging with the public about them, and really the face of it all. So first off, I think all of this next 30 minutes really all revolves around being sure that we are stewarding these products correctly. And that not only has to do with selecting the correct product and knowing our PPE, knowing our labels, but also just making good applications. So there's really a lot of things that are in our control as far as what we can do to be sure that we're being good stewards and that the public sees us as heroes rather than the bad guys. Perception is really everything. Misidentification is one that will come back and bite us. If we are going out for a certain species, we better be darn sure that it is what we think it is. Otherwise, we're basing our entire program on something that may or may not actually be there. So that is one of the reasons why I do like to promote a tank mix, because you're going to pick up more of what I would call those junk weeds out there, that some people just want to see grass or don't really want to see anything else out there other than something that cattle can graze. But on the flip side of things, there are also other situations where we may want to be more selective. So knowing what our target is and then knowing what we don't want to target is going to help us select the proper product for the situation. Coverage is huge. We talked about this earlier, right? Especially as it pertains to annual grasses or even broadleaves with a shadow effect. We could be choosing the perfect product for the pest that's out there, but if the product doesn't get there, it's null and void. It doesn't matter. So we're increasing our exposure at that point. Plus, we know we're going to have a follow-up treatment. And a lot of times with spot treatments, you know, you're getting more of that condensed product down to the plant. But going back and seeing, one, how did I do with my application? And two, being able to follow up if you do have some escapes can also be really important in case you're in a situation like this. So knowing the maximum use rate per application year is really important. A good example, I was just looking at this for a salt cedar project that someone's going to fly pretty quickly here. We may have a different maximum application, even if it has a grazing label. You may have a different max application in grazed versus non-grazed sites. So if you're in a grazed site and know that you're going to want to follow up either in that growing season or after, you're going to want to tailor your application rate depending on what your full-time plan is. spray pattern. We can always see where our skips are, and we hope that we don't see where our overlaps are, because we want to be sure that we're using those products that are maybe more forgiving if we were just so happen to have an overlap. But that also plays into public perception big time. If you're using a product that you know can be really detrimental to your desirables, if you do have an overlap, using a dye can really help. But also really take your time, be sure that you're lining up that spray pattern correctly. Otherwise it can look really bad if you've got just a nice little snake of bare ground in there. Nobody likes to see that. All right, so getting more into the toxicity, I'm gonna go into some LD50s, but really what I hope from this is that you all have some more talking points here. So if someone is engaging you and talking to you about what you're doing, why you're using what you're using, you've got kind of some common sense terms to talk with them about. I feel like that's one thing that our industry could do a lot better at, is bringing everything down a level. Yes, the science is important. Yes, the chemistry is important in terms of why we're using what we're using, how we developed these products, but the average homeowner, landowner has no idea about chemistry. I was an econ major, so a lot of this I've learned in the field, and I like more common terms. That makes sense to me. Another thing that I've noticed, a lot of times when we're getting into these conversations with the public who isn't as educated, they don't really care much about the science. There's normally a deeper rooted cause for their concern with herbicide, whether it was something that they read or something that they had a personal experience around. That's normally what's really driving those conversations. So it's good to have the science to back it up, but I think it's even more important to have just some good talking points to find some common ground with someone. So before we get into some of the things that have helped me talk through toxicities as it's pertained to herbicides, this really breaks it down in terms of what we really care about when we are choosing a herbicide. So if there is a hazard there, but we're minimizing our exposure, we can really mitigate how that tool is utilized in our program. On the flip side, sometimes the benefits of a certain product don't outweigh the risks or the hazards. For example, if you're choosing like if we're looking at bare ground products is the one that comes to mind, there are some older chemistries that work really, really well in bare ground. But when I look at risk and hazard, the likeliness of something not going exactly as planned, if it doesn't go exactly as planned, I've got a high risk for hazard. I don't know if I really want to take that risk. The benefit of a lot of herbicides in the discovery phase sometimes isn't big enough for it to make it to market. So when we're in that discovery phase, I talked about earlier how we are actively looking for products that fit a range of pasture, land management type of market. There are certain times where we will find a molecule that may be super active on a species that we really need a new active on, but it might be too expensive. It might cause damage to, or it may have too high of a risk to cause damage to our desirables. So at that point, we can't really move forward with it. I think this is one that I wish when folks call me, we have a 1-800 hotline number, and most of the time it's applicators, but sometimes it is the public just seeking some educational help with a product that was sprayed in their area. I wish I could like text this or flash this up to them when they're asking me questions about what we're using. If we're minimizing our exposure, toxicity really doesn't become that big of a piece of the conversation, right? And on the flip side, if we're exposing ourselves to something that is perceived as having no toxicity, like we're really minimizing our risk there. So I think that's something that to keep in mind here. I always like to bring up to the milk jug challenge. I don't know if anybody remembers that, when there were people who were chugging a gallon of milk and people were causing themselves major physical harm. We don't normally see milk as something that could be detrimental to us, but it's all in dosage. Bonnie talked a little bit about acute and chronic toxicity. So I'm not going to focus too much on this, but there is a reason that there are PPE requirements on the label. These are all things that are looked at in order for us to register a pesticide. So LD50s is something that I like to bring up in conversation whenever I'm engaging someone who may not have much experience with herbicide. But a lot of times, if they don't have experience with herbicide, or even if they do, they may not know what an LD50 is. So feel free to take a picture or a snapshot of this. But the definition is pretty straightforward. So it's the amount of dosage that it's necessary to kill 50% of a test population of animals. So the important thing here is that the higher the LD50, the lower the toxicity. So we want that number to be higher, which means that it would take much more of it for us to be exposed to it in order for us to see issues. I really like this slide. I need to keep adding to it because there's more and more things that you can add to it. But we don't really think twice about putting gas in our vehicle. I mean, unless it's wintertime, I don't wear gloves when I'm fueling up my vehicle. The other thing that sticks out to me on here is that look at how far we've come in terms of just new products being better and safer for us. Milestone clear over on the right hand side, 3752. You could OD on caffeine and bleach far quicker than you could on Milestone. So there's a lot of things around us that we expose ourselves to every day that are much more detrimental to us than herbicides. However, we still want to be properly stewarding these products because unfortunately in our industry, when we don't follow those guidelines, when we don't follow PPE, that's when bad things happen, and bad things happen quickly. And I'm going to talk about some of those examples that we've seen in the industry later on. Most of the products that we are using in our world are slightly toxic to moderately toxic, which means you're going to have quite a bit of exposure in order to see issues there. Most of the time when we get into higher toxicities, insecticides tend to, that's normally where you get into the danger or danger poison. But that's one thing, these signal words are things that we really look at when we're registering products as well. One of the main reasons that we moved forward with our choline technology, Vaslan is a 4-pound triclopyr choline. And one of the reasons that it's better than Garlon 3A is because of signal word. So all it took is one conversation with Texas Department of Transportation to say, hey, you can really limit your exposure to your employees. One, because it's a 4-pound product instead of a 3-pound product. So you've got less handling, less issues there, but it's also reduced signal word from danger down to caution. So those things really resonate with people. And, you know, there are still plenty of products out there that you guys are probably thinking, okay, what do I have in my shed? Or maybe what do I still even have in my spray tank that may be a higher signal word, or that maybe is riskier. If we're using it correctly, they still solve some problems. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use those, but there's more and more public perception out there who do care about what we're doing and do care about what we're using. And I think we're going to continue to see more of that. And so we just need to be sure that we're able to talk through that when those conversations do come up. Chronic toxicity would be the delayed effects of exposure to a herbicide. And this next slide, I didn't know this until after I started working for, it was Dow at the time, but all subchronic and chronic tests must indicate no significant related effects. Otherwise, the product cannot be labeled with the EPA. And that line alone has really stopped conversations with naysayers from going way overboard. Not saying that we don't know. I mean, I go back to, like, it wasn't that long ago that, you know, mom and dad were eating bacon and eggs every morning for breakfast. And I mean, just in my lifespan, we've heard about how we shouldn't do that, how we should do that. They've taken milk out of our diet, put it back in. I mean, it's a lot of this, like, it takes years and years for you to really figure out if anything could pose a threat or a problem. So being able to compare it to something in daily life, or something very common like food, it is normally a good way to kind of tone down someone from going off the deep end as it pertains to herbicides or pesticides. In terms of risk factors, we may put a lot of focus on the herbicide as being a big risk, but man, when I was cutting salt cedar, I was more worried about one of them short little shoots coming back and jabbing me. So there's a lot of other things in your all's world that are much more dangerous than even the herbicides that we're using. But something that may, I guess, maybe cause you to think differently about what you are using is when things do go wrong. You know, if you do get into some tough territory with your four-wheeler sprayer and it does happen to roll, would you rather have something in there that's going to immediately cause some type of skin irritation, or maybe choosing something a little bit more environmentally friendly is just that extra layer, that extra peace of mind to know, okay, I know I'm a good applicator and I know how to do what I need to do safely. But if something does go wrong, if it just so happens to not go exactly like it's always gone, what's my risk here? All right, so getting into the fun stuff, understanding public attitude about vegetation management. So I've got a survey here. Dow AgriScience, I don't know if y'all are familiar, but we have a program called Look Around, Turn Around, and also Notify Your Neighbor. And the purpose of these programs were, one, to have applicators really be more aware of what is around them while they're spraying, and what risks are around them, not only before and during, but after. So if you just so happen to have a product volatilize, etc. Notify Your Neighbor is a program that they utilize very heavily in the eastern part of the United States. And it is mostly around utility work, where we actually help notify the public about treatments going on in their area. We partner with our applicators there and give them support tools so they can effectively communicate with landowners about the products that they're using and how it's going to benefit them. So I can see the screen, so I should be able to see from a show of hands here. We surveyed the public here on their attitudes about vegetation management. And there were 3 categories that we put them in. Either comfortable, like they are very comfortable, they're educated with vegetation management. Concerned, so they care about what you're doing, but they really don't have a, concerned is that they know about what you're doing and they care a lot about what you're doing. And then uncommitted, they don't have opinions whether you're there or not. So show of hands, how many people think that the majority of the people we surveyed were comfortable? Did I see maybe like 1 or 2 hands? Is that about 1 or 2? Okay. How many people think that the biggest test group was concerned? They care a lot about what you're doing. They care a lot about what you're using. Okay, I'm seeing a lot more hands there. Guys in the back waving to me, I appreciate that. Or I'm gonna tell myself you guys were. And then how about uncommitted? How many people think that most people don't care about what you're using, don't care really about what you're doing at all? All right, I see a couple there. So those with your hands up, uncommitted by far and large is the biggest group out there. The interesting thing is we hear much more from the concerned groups, right? So that group seems like it's so much bigger. And I think one could argue that it's certainly growing. I mean, our world has definitely changed since this survey came out. And I think it could be interesting to see if these numbers do change. But the truth is, most people really don't have an opinion on it. Not until the media asks them to have an opinion on it, or one of their neighbors, friends tells them that they should have an opinion on it. But the concerned folks are the ones that normally speak up. So that's where we're going to get into when those folks do speak up, what tools do you have in your toolbox to engage with them? So common question, how do I know what you're using is safe? This is where I really like talking about LD50s. Also really like in our portfolio, even if they're veg management products, a lot of them do have no grazing restrictions for any class of livestock. So I like being able to pull out specific things from the label to give them a little bit more peace of mind. But also if you can talk about how little you're really putting out there per acre. I remember the first time I went backpack spraying and I was like, this is literally all we're putting out there. Like this little of milestone is actually going to work. It blew my mind. And so having something like what I talked about with DuraCore, hey, we're actually only putting out the equivalent of about 7 paper clips over an acre. And our products are actually much safer than what you may consider like an organic pesticide or a non-selective tool like garbage bags or tarping. How is the application going to affect trees, shrubs, and my garden? So really depends on what product you're using, of course, because certain situations we are actually trying to get rid of trees or brush. But I think the important thing here is selectivity doesn't only go back to the molecule, it also goes to the applicator. So as long as we are avoiding, drip lines, as long as we are avoiding foliage, a product like Milestone or DuraCore is very selective on those types of things. And a lot of that control we have as the applicator. But if that is a concern, maybe we want to consider using something safer around trees just for that additional peace of mind, like Transline, for example. I also get this question a lot as it pertains to using manure that's been treated with aminopyrrolide. I've been asked if there's any type of, there's like a coal burning that people have asked about, if you can like somehow work the aminopyrrolide out of the manure. That is off label. Anytime that you are moving something that was treated with DuraCore or Milestone within that 18 months, it's on the label, it will have active product there, and there is not a way that is on the label for you to safely be able to put that into your garden or into your composting. And I would just hate for something bad to happen. There's a lot of times that I actually talk guys out of using my products and talk them into using something else, because I don't want that risk to become a reality. So we talked about toxicities. Hopefully there are some pieces out there that wasn't too much overlap, but gives you some talking points if there does happen to be a situation where you're engaging the public about what you're using and why you're using it. Be sure that you have resources handy. If there is a cheat sheet that you have that has like quick hits on the label, I have a few of those. We've made different sheets that talk about, sorry, it's coming back and forth to me. Is it echoing over there?
Sorry.
Okay.
Good to go.
Okay, sorry about that. It was like I was in a echo chamber over here. But have some of those resources, like I mentioned, because I get tongue-tied when somebody starts attacking me about how could you possibly spray this? This is going to kill my dog. This is going to, hurt my kid. I mean, people get up in your face really quickly about this stuff, and it's freaky. It's scary. You could be the smartest person in the world on this, but if someone's really coming at you, it's good to have some of those resources handy just in case. So get a hold of Bonnie if you all need anything. We do have materials available that are great talking points for engaging the public that we distribute for free. Also remember that the majority of people don't have an opinion about herbicide applications. It's just that the majority of the people who speak up are the ones who are concerned. And so we need to prepare ourselves to be good stewards, be able to apply what we know as being a good applicator. And you guys should absolutely brag yourselves up in that sense. Like, talk about your experience, talk about the different things that you all do. It is impressive, some of the terrain that you all cover, and also the things that you are doing for the land. This isn't just about killing weeds. This is about creating better habitat. This is about reducing fire risk. What you all do is really important. And I think the more that we can talk about that outside of the actual application of what we're doing, the better that we are going to feel about what we're doing, but also it gives us something more to give back to the public in terms of their perception about us. Because most people may think like, hey, we're just out here spraying weeds. That's not the case at all. We're being relied upon for power when we look at utility situations. So think about more of those pieces that you can talk about. And it is absolutely okay to brag about what you all do. Okay. In closing here, I do want to bring up why this is so important and why this hits home. Not sure if you all know why Tordon 22K is a restricted use pesticide. Raise your hand if you know the story. Okay, so anyone familiar with the Tordon 22K beads? They were actually Tordon like 2K, I think. Okay, I'm seeing a hand or two. So they were really handy. Ranchers would just throw them in their saddlebag, and if you saw a weed, you just throw out. There was an application guide. But obviously in a pelleted form that you're telling someone to throw out, pretty easy to over apply. But there were still the same restrictions around water in terms of a buffer zone. Well, what happened was, this happened in the eastern part of the United States. There was a situation where the product was being misused, it was being over applied, and it was also getting into the water supply. And the threshold for the amount of active that was allowed was way over. and it became a restricted use pesticide. So Tordon, when it was originally registered, was not restricted use. So keep that in mind when you're using some of these new herbicides and maybe operating on that gray area. Be cautious, be careful, because all it takes is one of those situations and we could be looking at another restricted use pesticide. Rick touched on this earlier with interpreting a grazed site. I have heard both sides on this from different Department of Ags in terms of if elk or wildlife are grazing an area, do we need to have a grazed label? It's a difficult gray area. Fortunately, all of our products that we use in these gray situations do have grazing allowances, but that is an important thing to discuss. Even if you think you don't need one, you may want to talk to the stakeholders to be sure that they understand what that grazing restriction means or doesn't mean to them. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's not always the active ingredient that we need to be worried about, but the inert ingredient. So when something comes off patent, all a generic company really has to do is figure out how to formulate that molecule. They'll do it in the cheapest way possible. There's no R&D, there's no development there. So all they're trying to do is get a product out quick, fast, cheap, which great in certain situations. But one of the ways that they do cut corners is with the inert ingredients. So an example that I love is if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. Well, there's mallards and there's mud hens. And I think that there's a big difference when you're hunting which one that you really want to go after. So certain branded products may not cause irritation or may not clog pumps, but if you pick up the generic, don't expect it to be the same product. It's not. And then lastly, as it pertains to risk, know that if you're using a long residual product, Spike ADDF, for example, is one. It can remain active in the soil and on those soil particles for a long time. So if that soil moves, guess what? You're going to have active products somewhere else. So keep that in mind when you're looking at a long-term residual, you're looking at a long-term commitment. And if the area that you're using it is really a safe space for that risk. So in closing, I think hunting is another area where perception is really everything. Some people look at this and question how on earth could hunting still even be a thing. I look at it and I'm so proud that I was able to help out some of my friends in Colorado who literally could not find meat in grocery stores when this pandemic started. And I was fortunately able to help them out with a bull that I had got last year. So perception is reality to a lot of people. And it's really our responsibility to share our story so we can better communicate with those folks. We may not change their mind, but at least open the idea or open a new avenue for them. So we're looked at more as a partner rather than someone that they should be afraid of. So I have eaten up the 30 minutes there. Does anyone have question, comment, or even any feedback for me?
Like we're good. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie.